Thank you. Today my program is lifelong resident, family's grown up here, but Jim Battershell.
I really should.
I've had the opportunity to talk to Jim more than I ever have since he started his article in our newspaper, and it is a blessing. He has done a tremendous job and has reached out to so many people. I remember the day I asked him in my office if he'd be interested, because Bill Metz, when Bill was sick and wanted to find somebody to replace him for that article, he had come up with Jim's name. And Bill got real excited when we thought of Jim and maybe somebody that could take over, talk about town things, history of the town, which is important to any community, because putting that stuff and compiling and going back and looking for research and stuff like we've had so many people do with that article, even not being from here, it's fun to read. You know, you pick up some of the names you remember in big places, but people that have grown up here, I think, has an impact on memories and opportunities and things from their past and things for the future. So we are blessed at the Tribune and as a community and as a newspaper to have Jim be a part of that. And then talking to Jim when he comes in and works with our staff for coming up with ideas and help with pictures and things like that. We've had some great conversations over the time that he's done it. So I'm very thankful for Jim doing that, and for Lisa letting him do it with us. So, you know, it's part of the wife thing too. I'm sure Jim spends a lot of time at home putting that together. But Jim's bringing, I think his talk today is actually about his church, that Catholic church in town. They are celebrating a milestone with an anniversary. It's been a part of this community for over 100 years, an impact in our community, and reach out for, you know, Christ and his teachings and everything. But I won't take any more time. Please stand, or don't stand, but please welcome Jim Battershell. Thank you.
What an honor to be here. Outside there when we were passing out meals for the kids, we were talking about the first time I spoke at this meeting, and it was our good friend Raleigh Doden who brought me along. Bob Luderman I know as well, probably Raleigh brought him in here. But I had wrote a book, The History of Hicksville, in 1975. I was a sophomore in college. Lisa, before the word processing era, typed the manuscript by hand. And then the Tribune, the first time I was in there, because we got a lot of the information out of old boxes and stuff. And so Raleigh had me come in and give a speech. And what I remember is after the meal, and this room was packed, but I'd kind of look around as this little sophomore in college, people had their eyes shut, their heads were like this, and I thought, oh my goodness, I was really intimidated by that. So, but I'm so old now, it wouldn't bother me at all. So if you need a nap, do it. I wanted to thank Mike for the invitation today. The Tribune is really a family environment, and that family is hurting right now because, of course, of the Jeff Peppel being in a fire and trying to recover from that. I remember Jeff is probably the best basketball player I ever seen play at Hicksville because he was so fluid. You know, when I play basketball, I got to watch my hand in the ball, so you know the coach never would put me in if I could dribble that way. But Jeff is just fantastic, and our hearts surely go out to you, Mike, as you're going through that. Father Daniel Borgelt is our pastor at St. Michael. He's the 40th pastor there. When I counted those up, I just couldn't believe it. So he's our 40th pastor, couldn't be here today, does send his best regards. A special treat today, in the back page of the Tribune is my column, and I call it the Let's Chat column. And I realize that history can be kind of dry, and I can be even more dry. So I've added some humor to the column, and I actually have a special treat for you today because Lisa is the author of the one-liners, and she has one just for you folks.
Mine's just a little short story about 3 very hard-hearing Hicksville Rotarians, and they were seen down to the park last week, standing outside the Rotary Pavilion, enjoying its beauty, when one said, "It's windy," and the second one said, "No, today's Thursday." And the third one said, yeah, I'm thirsty too. Let's have some coffee.
Lisa and I are celebrating our 42nd anniversary? 44th. I'm just testing her.
That'd be about $5.
At least. So that's tomorrow? Or no, Thursday. Boy, that's another 5 right there. Let me talk about something I do know about. I want to tell you that Catholics have been in the village of Hicksville for 175 years. They were here in 1846. How do I know that? Because 7 Catholics between Hicksville and Marks Center went to Defiance, where a missionary was there, and they wanted the missionary to know they wanted service. They walked down there. They didn't know for sure the missionary would be there. And it's not like you pick up the phone. You just, by hearsay. Fortunately, they ran into the guy that would become their first pastor, Amadeus Ropp. Good German name. He also became a bishop after this assignment here. His assignment by the Bishop of Cincinnati, and you probably remember Ohio was first populated along the Ohio River because they could come along in rafts and other such things, and probably none of your kayaks like you travel in, Turk, but that was the way to go get into Ohio. The largest landholder in that era was George Washington. French and Indian War, he was out here. He went along the Monongahela River out of Pittsburgh down into this area, and he could really see the fertile areas, and he bought and bought and bought. So he was land rich, not necessarily pocket rich with money. Father Ropp agreed to provide missionary services for them. So he put their name down, but it was about a year later that he was replaced. But he talked to his replacement, and that guy also became a bishop later on in Vermont. But he told our second priest, make sure you provide services for these people. They came down here. I was incredibly impressed with their enthusiasm, with their work ethics, what they wanted there in terms of services. And that continued until 1873, because we had bishops. We didn't have any more bishops. We had missionaries that would come in. And what did they do in terms of services? First of all, it was friendship. You know, like a good pastor like Steve does. It's friendship. It's encouragement like Steve does. It was a want of having masses. And the host in the Catholic Church, what we call Holy Communion, is very, very special to Catholics, because we feel the host is an embodiment of Jesus Christ. So it's a very special moment in a Catholic Mass. So they wanted communion. What are other things? Well, in that day and age, you didn't live long, and there was lots of death. So the priest didn't come and help Turnbull Funeral Home with a funeral. No, they would come maybe, they weren't coming every week or every Sunday. It would maybe be every 6 weeks, every 6 months, you know, over this 73-year period. Some never came. But they were patient, and they just really appreciated it. But these missionaries would teach them other things. Like if somebody died, they would, as we do today, if you see a funeral, they'll bless the ground that the loved one is about to impart in. Weddings. You want to get married? You had to wait until the priest came. So there wasn't a lot of planning involved. You just knew you were in love with Lisa. And when the priest happened to come here, he said, we decided we want to get married. There wasn't a lot of time. Again, they didn't live a lot. They didn't live long, and they were needed to work. They worked to live, genuinely did. Most priests could read, or these missionary priests, most of the populace here couldn't. They wanted to know more about Bible passage. When they traveled, usually the only book they brought was a Bible, if that. You know, there's weight considerations. The Bible getting wet, and it's been in the family for years, so maybe you leave it back in Massachusetts or wherever you're from. The other thing is, it's kind of interesting in terms of utensils. You didn't bring a knife, a fork, and a salad fork. You brought usually just a spoon, and typically metal plates. But anyways, that's an aside. But the missionaries would also help with land contracts. These people couldn't read. They didn't know when they were being swindled. A lot about health and safety, you know, the drinking of water, whatever they may have known in, say, 1846 to 1877, and even crop growing advice. So, just like Steve, I see him do so much in this community with helping all sorts of people. That's kind of what missionaries did in that day. So, we had missionaries until 1873. And something huge happened in 1873. We became what's called a station parish. Or we were given station status. That's the word I want, because we didn't have a church yet. And we weren't called St. Michael. We were just called Hicksville Catholics. And Turk well knows, being a good Catholic boy, or grew up, that we always have had a priest that never lived here. But we were now a station of Edgerton, Ohio, where Father Borgelt lives. Never have had a resident priest here. The priest lived, I got here, Antwerp, Delaware Bend, Antwerp another time, and then Edgerton today. The neat thing about being a station situation, they had services more often. They suddenly became on the schedule. Instead of when the other missionaries were basically traveling, their assignment was along the Maumee River and the canals, because that's where the population base was. Well, big things happened in 1880 when we built our first church. And that priest of that era is kind of famous, Father Frederick Rupert. And Father Rupert provided the name. He didn't take surveys in those days and so forth of your church population. You know, they just were all knowing. When they were at the pulpit, they spoke to these people who couldn't read or write the Bible typically. His job was to interpret the Bible and share it. That's why they often call it, in a Catholic church, a homily instead of a sermon. It wasn't meant to be a sermon or review what you should do. It was supposed to be a homily exposing what that person's interpretation was. Now here's an interesting one. One of the things that Father Rupert, he didn't live here, he had other places to serve, and one of them was a small community called Furnace for a $5 in the Turk's little box there. Does anybody know what the community of Furnace was? I can see you know it's Cecil, Ohio. And why did they call it Furnace? That was the locale around here if you wanted things made of metal, like the band around a wagon wheel that's metal. They had furnaces over there to melt metal down. And you think of that area more for it because they had much more of the Black Swamp area flooding their plains. So, and tiling, it started about 1850. And by about 1890, they had things pretty well in control here. But that's where you got your steel stuff. Now, how did this church come to Hicksville? It's kind of interesting. Everybody knows that the Hicksville is named after the Hicks family of Long Island, New York. And Lisa and I have been to Hicksville, New York. It kind of reminds you driving through New Haven, where there's that interstate with people living on both sides of, I think it's 30. That's kind of like what Hicksville, New York was like. Anyways, Alfred Peleg Edgerton, the founder of this community who came here in 1836, his church was the Episcopalian church. It still stands right across the street when you leave here today, right beside this building, not across the street. It's that little white church over there. Okay, one of the Hicks women found out that Alfred Peleg Edgerton had not provided land for Catholics here. And she was a Catholic. And she had some control over Alfred because he was still, even at that time, you know, there was a relationship. So she made sure that he donated land. And the land is actually where Steve's Lifeline Connect Ministry Center on Fountain Street exists. Kind of the corner at Dixon and Fountain, kind of at the corner of Edgerton and Fountain. That's where it's sat. Now, it was a wooden facility. It was the baby brother to this Episcopalian church. It looks just like it. They used the same blueprints. They just made it smaller. And they didn't call it blueprints in those days. They're called church plans. So that's a baby brother of that. And I told you that priest gave it the name St. Michael. And it was used for 41 years. Eventually it started rotting, but they used that wooden facility up into the late 60s. The Assembly of God Church used that. Then eventually it was just torn down. Now big things happened in 1920 when we built what Protestants call, I often hear this, the big brick Catholic church with the big bell tower. And that's also St. Michael's Catholic Church. That's our second church. Now some people are confused that there were 3 churches, Catholic churches in Hicksville. There are only 2. They get confused because there was a plan that an architect had proposed in 1918. Remember, in 1921 is when we dedicated that church. And while we're having our 100th anniversary, it didn't pass. But I put a picture in the paper that I think it was last week. And you could see that. It had more of a Spanish design. It was a sandstone exterior. Now the big thing with putting this church together, though, is the walls. They gave us the land down there, and I don't think Alfred Edgerton was alive then. It could have been the family, and the family was very close to the Slatteries, the Fountainland Farm. As you're going to Antwerp, they had what they called a hunting lodge, where Dennis Slattery, and now I believe the Michael family lived there. So I think they were involved with, anyways, the land was free, but where you put that Catholic church was a creek bed. It was quicksand. But these folks didn't have any money. It's the best. I interviewed Dennis Slattery. I had that interview in the paper. I believe it was last week or the week before. He said, we just took what we could. And then from the ground down, the church members, they wanted to build that footprint up higher to get above this quicksand. So they were going down the railroad. They'd get horse and buggy loads of what they call clinkers. The coal that had been spent by the freight trains that would go through. So they transport them, haul them, and they were such a help. And in in August of 1921, what's described in the Hicksville News Tribune as a sunny, exciting, and joyous day, those farmers who worked so hard to give us that beautiful brick structure you see now, they reached fruition. In 1932, I want to talk about one of your Rotarians, Carol Sleesher. He told me the banks are ready to possess, as they did many. They didn't just hit houses and farms. They didn't care who they were. They were looking at bottom dollar. And they were going to take the Catholic Church, so they talked to their pastor, a Father Horrigan, a good Irish name, I'm told. So you're hearing a lot of Irish, German names in here. Early people were also Hungarians. The Adams family, Joe and Vic, Hungarian. So, you had some of that in there. So they came up with this idea for an ice cream social. And I remember I interviewed Carol about, he's one of my heroes. He always wanted, he was in the Crippled Children's Society. His wasn't about amassing huge sums of money. His goal was to serve kids and to serve other people that needed help. And I so admired him. Anyways, he was 14 years old, and he remembers that. He no longer could go to school. He had to work at the farm and this and that. And they came up with an ice cream social in the front yard of that church. As Carol said, suddenly, I think this is a golf term, they felt like they had skin in the game. And I can still remember that wonderful, Carol had this booming voice, they had skin in the game, Jim, and he's rattling his arm like that, and he felt so good that they did, and the bank never got the church. 1966, 67, baby boomer time, most all of us in this room were a part of that. After World War II, people started having lots and lots of kids, and schools grew. 1956, the elementary school came up. And along with that, St. Michael's Catholic Church doubled the size of their facility. They had 900 people, and most of those people came to church in those days. It's not the case today. And they built a gym and a priest house that went along with it. Funny story about the priest house, and I bet Kurt Turk knows this one. We had a wonderful priest named Father Stein. He had this booming baritone voice. He loved to sing loud. Pete Greer, you ever been around Pete? Yeah, everybody has. You know how he sings when he sings. He sings with his soul. And Father Stein was the same way, and he was known as the builder priest in the Toledo diocese. And they'd send him 4 or 5 years, areas that needed it, and then they'd send him on. Well, he had this wise idea. He had this name and this power. he was going to build a house for a priest. And if he built that house, the bishop would send a priest. Okay, so we have our dedication ceremony for that in 1967. The bishop does come. He walks to, Father Stein's trying to keep him away from that building. And the bishop rules. He took Father, what is this? It's a rectory. Well, you don't need a rectory, you don't have a priest. Well, now we kid. And Bishop, and I don't know. I think the conversation probably got loud and colorful after that, but nobody knows for sure. Going into 2001, 2003, I want to move you up to that point. We had a wonderful priest. I'm hoping all of you know, Father Tom Odie. He turned around a parish that was broken in spirit. Our church was just falling apart. Windows were so loose. Those beautiful windows that were in 1920 that were brought from the Bavarian section of Germany were loose in their frames. Literally, those priceless stained glass windows could have fell out, especially those ones up really high. Well, they did, because the church got together, we started doing that. And then the roof, the slate roof they put in there in 1920, it's leaking all over. You look at the front of the altar, and they had a cross up really high, and you could see like an area there where the plaster was coming. That's because it was actually coming through the side. And so there were all sorts of problems. People were even saying, let's just bulldoze this and start over. You know, we're really hearing that, and I don't know. I'm glad we didn't. I mean, it would have been really nice, we were talking millions of dollars to fix this facility up when it's that big. People got together, and I'm going to tell you, when we were done in 2003, we got an elevator, which all of you will enjoy sometime in your life, at that church. We got a canopy to drive underneath, and we just totally rebuilt. We had over 70 people. This is how this far the Odie worked. It was all about transparency, involving them in every decision. He did use committees, unlike the early priests and missionaries. And we have a wonderful facility. We're celebrating on August 21st, which is not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. The current bishop, Thomas, is coming. We're inviting all of you. I mean, we want to be ecumenical, because that's what Vatican II was all about. We aren't just one church. We're a community of churches, no matter what our faith is. And a wonderful pope by the name of St. John believed that to the core of his heart. I want to read to you, as I close here, on what Father Ludwig, his closing remarks the day that this ceremony was dedicated. And it's about Mike and I pulled this up in the Tribune. It was so hard to read. This is the only part. But it was like God meant for us to be able to read this part, because we couldn't read the rest of the article. I quote from Father Ludwig, a young man of about 45, a priest. I want to express to the people of Hicksville sincere gratitude for the encouragement and help given by them. We keenly appreciate the attitude of friendliness and goodwill on the part of the non-Catholic population. Now, this is a time, a very anti-Catholic time. You know, you hear about the immigrants coming in from the border to the south right now. They're making such a big deal out of. In those days, it was the Irish. They didn't want those Irish immigrants here who were largely Catholic. So I think it's neat here that he's doing this. So he's talking about, we wish to assure them, the non-Catholic, that as we have now enriched the city of Hicksville, I don't know about that, by the building of a beautiful and monumental edifice, so shall we for all the future be ready. He's speaking to us right now. We need to be ready and willing to work with the rest of the citizens for the religions. Religions means all the churches. Moral and civic betterment of our beloved town. Here's his closing sentence. That is our pledge on the day of this dedication of the new St. Michael Catholic Church. I tingled all over the first time I read it. I'm tingling all over as I read it today, because God is good, and I pass.
Does anyone have any questions? You're always
I try to help all the time.
Steve?
You said that the community at the dedication, I think, was anti-Catholic.
the country as a whole.
Oh, the country.
It was kind of like it is with the immigrants in the South. Right? You know, right now they're blaming the COVID incidents. It's on those people. Those people were sneaking over the border. It was kind of that.
What do you think the religion was, or the denomination was at that one time?
It was Catholic. You know the what? In the country, probably mainline Protestants, Presbyterian, Lutheran. Not Lutheran so much. More Methodist. Those. You know, those were the kingpins of churches in that era. And that really didn't change until President Kennedy, if you remember, in 1960 when he was a senator, you know, he was getting such pressure. You know, the Pope's going to control you. You can't be president. He got up and he kind of changed that. He said, my obligation is to the Constitution of the United States. It's not to the Pope in Rome. Powerful words. There were other questions. I'll try not to be so windy in my answers. Turk, come on. Look at it. You can tell he's got a question.
I had to start the questions every time.
Good job.
Well, thank you very much.
You know, you want to tell them about the celebration times, what's going on a little bit?
Absolutely. Because we truly want you to come. Father Dan is opening up the church. If you've never been to a Catholic church before, here's your opportunity. We really don't hide guns on the altar. That was one of the rumors in the 20s. Yep. Because those who were opposed to Catholics, so they'd have their rifles. I've never seen that was true, at least here. The situation, we're going to have Mass at 4 o'clock the following Saturday. Bishop will be there. He'll do it. That's kind of neat, too. A lot of pomp and ceremony. And then 5, we're going to have a potluck. Why are we having a potluck? Well, we couldn't afford to have it catered in. But I didn't want the altar and rosary ladies to have to be back in a kitchen. They're mostly senior citizens now. I want them to enjoy this day. So we decided, again, to have skin in the game, like Carol Sleesher talked about. We're having a potluck. If you don't have a potluck, come anyways. And during that time, until we leave, again, you're welcome to come and tour the church. The actual worship space. We're leaving that open. And that was Father Dan's idea. Just a wonderful man. I don't know. We're going to try to keep it short. This was kind of, my speech I gave today is kind of a preliminary. What I do there, I say I need to shorten it some more. But we want to get done in that hour and send you on your way. Now, whether you can do that with a lot of people like to talk, I don't know. Maybe we need a timeout signal or something. I'm not doing that to the bishop, but maybe turn around.
Thank you, Jim and Lisa, for joining us. Please stand for the pledge.